All right, hey folks, I think we're live. Yes, we are. Looks that way. Sorry for the delay. Apparently you need to reboot your computer twice before using Zoom and OBS, not just once.
What we've got here is sort of a cobbled together bit of string, paper clips, and bubble gum.
It's totally a kludge, yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing it works at all. So
sometimes I am amazed that it works at all, yes. All right. So it's been a couple of weeks. I was out sick last week, but all is better now on my end. So welcome folks. This is episode 13.
13. Is it really 13?
It's 13. I looked it up.
Okay, well that explains why everything failed.
Oh, I wish. Yes, I wish that was the only explanation. Hey, Sweetie, welcome.
Hey, Sweetie. So yeah, last time I think what we had done, as I dig through my brain, that 2 weeks was a very long time ago.
It is so long time, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, speaking of which, it is time for a regularly scheduled derailment. I saw that you just posted that you've got your new refactoring to hexagonal architecture course coming up.
Yes. So this is a course that I opened up for sales back in August, early access, and then closed it because I didn't want too many people. And since I've been pushing out more videos recently, I opened it because I'd gotten some queries from a few people. So I opened it for a very short period of time. And interestingly enough, in today's, so part of one of the levels of the package is office hour, where we basically have an hour for people to ask questions. And one of the questions that came up was, so how about this Nullables thing? And I said, interesting, you should ask, because later on in the course, when I do some of the typical ports and adapters thing, I'm also going to have an extra deep dive and like, here's how it would look like Nullable. You choose. Nice. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of courses, my Nullables course, the early bird has sold out at this point, but there are still spots available, just not in the early bird discount, and those will be open. I doubt the course will sell out, although who knows? I would love for it to sell out, but I doubt it will. But you can find that at jamesshore.com/s/Nullables training, and I believe we have, yeah. We have the link here, but that will be coming up on April 11th and 12th, and that's live. I believe your course is self-directed with the office hours.
That's exactly right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've taught it live 40 plus times and decided there are people who are in time zones where it's not compatible, all sorts of reasons. But I always recommend that, like, if people ask me, it's like, hey, I want to do this and this kind of course, and it's like I always say, teach it live first. Yeah. And of course, the more interested people you have. I mean, I love doing it live, but for the interaction, and so I bet you'll get a lot of that in your course.
Yeah, but you got people coming to the office hours at least, right?
Yeah, that makes it. I mean, because and I think you and I have talked about this either offline or elsewhere. The real learning happens when you're doing it, and when you're talking about what you've done, and when you're comparing and contrasting things. And so also the ensembles, the weekly ensembles that I run are for people who are taking the course and get to apply that. Because actually another question I had in my office hour this morning was I can do it in the lab, but when I try to do it in my real code, I don't quite get it. It's like, yes, we need more and more practice, different kinds of practice in different situations. It's just practice. There's no shortcut. There's no downloading into your brain, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that translation from training to real world is, I think, where I find, in my experience, people struggle the most. It's very easy to sort of take a toy example or even a sophisticated example and solve it in a directed environment. But once you've got all the little bits and pieces, that's why I do office hours with my training as well. Yeah. It's because I tell people, we're going to do office hours, bring your own stuff.
Exactly.
And we'll talk about how to make it work.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about the way you're doing it is people can go off for a while and come back. You do your office hour every week, right?
Yeah.
So that's nice.
Yeah. So I had somebody bring their code, and I said, okay, you need to refactor your tests just as much as your production code, because they're talking about, like, I've got these 3 things in this service, and I keep it. It's like, let's focus on refactoring that. Yeah, I mean, the problem is a general learning education one called transfer. How do you transfer? And there's sort of near and far transfer, and transfer is the hardest thing, because you see one example, you kind of get it. You see two, you see three, and it's not until you like see a whole bunch of different examples and actually dig into them, get your hands dirty with them, that you really start to see the how to fit. It's like adapting this pattern and fitting it into the problem that you have. But it's really hard.
Yeah, yeah. And a certain amount of it is, I mean, when you're in a classroom environment, it's always tempting to peek at the answer. Right. But the learning comes from struggling through and figuring out, how to make it happen.
Yeah.
So anyway, speaking of struggling through, we got our database code that we've been working on.
Yeah.
We have been working for a long time on this for, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 episodes. I don't remember now. We have been working on the game database code, which, game database test and game database, I think, are sort of the entry points into this.
Yep.
And unless I've misunderstood, I think we finished that last time. We now have a save game and a load game that will actually work.
Yep. Sorry, I just watched. Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
About that. Okay. Yeah. I think we did some nice cleanup. We got our snapshots. We got our as persistable. We moved some of the conversion stuff into the value object itself. Had some good conversation about discussion. I have to say, I've been really like, it's this the way we sort of handle the what do we call it? Sort of the conversion from
with that default lambda.
Yes, with the default lambda. I gotta say, I've really fallen in love with it. I've been like looking at like, oh, I can put that into here. I can put that into here. Oh, that would be perfect for use in the controller, which is different from the test. And I really like how obvious it makes it, but also how sort of flexible it is. So yeah.
Yeah, that is nice. By the way, you might want to nuke a spammer from the chat.
Just did. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really happy with that too. Like I said, when we did this is the first time I had done it in this way. And I don't recall, I remember seeing something like this in Martin Fowler's second edition of Refactoring book, but I don't remember if he just put in a default value or if he used the lambda. But I think having the lambda is actually really cool. Like, I like that.
Yeah.
Because now we can throw that exception or, do whatever we want.
And you can tailor the exception. Like here we might have, this internal thing, but if we were creating a hand of dice from something that was coming in from a UI, I'd want it to do something completely different. I want it to create some HTTP result that says, hey, this is invalid.
Right. Yeah.
And so I just had to point it out because it's been on my mind since we did it, and I'm sort of, it's one of those, you can sort of see applications for it. You start seeing it everywhere where it could be handy.
Right. Well, because of this, there's this pattern of, I want you to do something, but it may not work out. That is constant. I mean, you see that everywhere.
Yeah.
But up until now, basically what I've always done is written 2 methods. 1, will this work? And then 2, do it. And if it doesn't work the second time, then, well, you screwed up. But now you can collapse this down into 1 method, and it's impossible to call this without being aware that something can go wrong.
And that's the thing that I've when you pointed it out, it's like, because my tendency had been to just throw an exception, but it's sort of hidden because it's a runtime exception. And you pointed it out, and I kind of felt like, oh yeah, I guess that's right. But what else can we do? And then you showed this one. I'm like, oh wow, that's just such a great fit.
Yeah, Suiji. Networks. I have been in the biz for a while, and you can just sort of look back through the history. Like, it goes all the way back to Java's. Java had automatic persistence in it, and then we had Corba, or maybe they were sort of inspired by the same stuff. And then we had service-oriented architecture, and then we had microservices, and then we had serverless, which is sort of a different thing. But there's this long and storied of history of forgetting that networking cannot be abstracted.
Yeah.
Like, it is a real thing with real
Yeah.
problems, and you cannot abstract it. And
Yeah.
everybody who tries is crashed up on the rocks over and over again.
I feel like they're thinking like, but it's different this time, and I'm like, nope, no, it's not. It's not different this
Well,
time.
yeah, it's either you're pretending the network doesn't exist, and then you are doomed for failure.
Yeah.
Or you're pretending the network, or you're wrapping the network in a leaky abstraction.
Right.
And you were just, giving new names to old problems. Like,
Right.
we have a network partition,
Right.
Except now we're going to call it, the foobar has Wesel.
Right. Right.
But still, you're dealing with the same problem. Thing that was supposed to be there ain't there anymore. The network's still live. What's gone wrong? The network's partition. But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. The RMI, Corba, EJB, all these grand schemes to like you said, to either pretend it doesn't exist or abstract it away in a way that isn't really abstracted away, because then like RMI would always throw an RMI exception. Well, what is that? Well, it was a network exception. Well, great. Why didn't you just tell me it was like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think Java is particularly prone to this because they do have this tendency to make new exceptions that are just wrappers of, you see that from it's not just Java. Any big framework is going to put put the crap in a different barrel, but it's still going to be crap that they're handing you. Yeah. And that just makes it harder to understand what's going on, because you've got a barrel with a box with a pot with, that ultimately has a little pile of crap in it.
Right.
And you still have to figure out what's really going on. This is one of my famous analogies. I don't know if this one's working as well as some of the other ones, but yeah.
At least it's a barrel.
Yeah. But you know how I've been saying I love checked exceptions, and even though they have problems, I think this new pattern where you pass in the lambda, I think that's better than checked.
I agree, and that's why I really like it. It like you said, it forces you to handle it. You can't. You could do the same sort of idea of catch and then do nothing by handing an empty lambda. You could totally do that. But then it would be so clear in the same way that hopefully a try catch that did the same thing would be. But here it would be so clear that you actually are ignoring whatever problem comes up.
It composes really nicely too, because if we did the same pattern, if you scroll up in Game Database and you scroll up to load game, I think. Yeah, so in load game, we're using a checked exception.
Right.
But if we had this pass in a lambda that says, what do you do if the load game can't be found? Mm-hmm. And we'll pass, we could just pass that function through and have it go down to the underlying thing.
So because the optional hands the not found, but the game corrupted is sort of this weird, and you have to handle this in an orthogonal way. Whereas if there was a lambda that we passed in to find by ID, then you could just, then we'd have to decide, do we want to assume, do we want to handle just an exception, or is not found not an exception? But at least it's all there, and you're not wrapping it with a try catch, and you're not relying on an exception that may or may not be obvious because it may not be checked. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely be interested in exploring this further. I think today, though, what I'd like to do is I think this is good enough. We might want to change the API for load game to use this new pattern, or not. I think we should wait until we're actually using it in practice to see how that works out. But what we definitely need to do before we can use Game Database in the rest of our code is we need to make it nullable.
Right.
And I know that the folks have been waiting for this for a while. So I'm glad we're finally getting to it.
Yeah.
So I think we have a couple of ways of doing this in our tests. Often I'll put the nullability tests in sort of their own little segregated area. But if you go over on the left and scroll down a little bit, we do have this sort of nicely divided into save and load. We could say that saving, that saving in a nulled case doesn't actually save, and the loading and a null case returns the expected value or the configured value. Or we could make a whole nother section, just call it nullability, and put it there. Do you have a preference on that?
I don't know yet. So I guess no.
Yeah. I'm not sure I do either. Well, there's going to be two things that we need to do. We need to do configuration so that we can configure which game we get back when we do a load.
Right.
We need to do, and that includes all sorts of nullability. So when we save, that it doesn't actually save to the database, doesn't try to save to the database.
Right.
But we also need to do output tracking, which is say, when we save, we can track what was saved to the database.
Right.
And remember, that happens regardless of whether the database has been nulled or not. That's just a thing that we do.
Right.
I think we should start with the output tracking because it tends to be lower impact and actually is technically not nullability specific. It's just something we can add. So that we would add to the save section and just say, save games are tracked or can be tracked or something like that.
All right. So
before you do that, can we just skim through and see what the namings are here and how it flows?
Yeah. Make
sure we're in the right spot.
I'll code minimize these so you can see just the names.
Yeah, I think at the bottom makes sense here. So I would probably title it something like save games are trackable, or save games can be tracked, or something like that.
Like that?
I'm pausing because technically it's save game that we're tracking. But one of the things that people struggle with Nullables is that it's not like a spy. We're not monitoring a particular method, we're monitoring a behavior. So I don't think it's so much that save game can be tracked, but saved games can be tracked, or saving games is trackable, or something like that.
Then I kind of like saving game can be are trackable or can be tracked.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, because you mentioned behavior, and I like, the saving game, sort of this active action oriented kind of phrasing feels right.
Yeah, I like Suiji's name too, but I think this is good. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a game database. Oh, I might be wrong here. Sometimes I'll do the output tracking after I implement the null, just so that it's not going against a real database, but it's not really relevant. And I think we've got good abstractions. Yeah, go ahead. Let's just keep going. Okay. So we're going to need to make a game database. Can you expand the previous test? I just don't remember how we do the save game stuff.
So we do we use our save game options in that case, and in this case.
Right. So we don't have, at this point, we don't have a game database. So we're going to need to be able to call game database.tracked, track output, or track saves, or something like that. Yeah, let's just do it. Where I'm going here is how can we use our existing abstractions? But I'm not sure that we can.
Right, because we need a handle to the game database.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. And we have to call track save on that before the saving happens. So in JavaScript, the way I do this is I have the save game return multiple values. I'll have it return the game database. I'll have it return the tracked output and stuff like that. But that's kind of a pain in the butt in Java. So that's why I'm sort of pausing on this. But I think let's just build it out sort of the naive way and then look at ways to refactor it.
So And so what we want to call it, at least before we do the save, is game database track save.
Track saves, yeah.
Saves.
Mm-hmm. Hey, SweetG, no, I don't end up with 2 tests because the code's the same in either branch.
And so we want to return, you'll have to remind me what we want to return.
So that is going to return an output tracker. And that is going to be of type T. Let's look at the way die roller works. No, die roller doesn't do tracking. What have we done that does tracking?
Our HTTP client and our notifier.
Yeah. Either one of those, I think.
Okay. We'll flip that over to the right side.
So that's a JSON. Do we expose the JSON HTTP request? Where does that come from?
That is a public thing. Totally accessible. So we do expose
it. I think that's what we're going to need to do, is we're going to need to make... Oh, so the question is, what is the output tracker actually going to track? Maybe it's just a snapshot.
So the snapshot and not the table object.
No, the output tracking always happens at the level of abstraction of the caller.
Right. So then snapshot sounds right.
Yeah, it's either that or we make a new thing. But I think game.snapshot, we're saving the snapshots, so that's what we want to track.
All right. Okay. So let's go create that method. And move this up.
By the way, as is tradition, my code together is completely wet the bed. So to the point that I'm going to have to do a force quit on it. So you might see a little request from me. I'm going to try using the same code that you gave me last time.
Yeah, the code should still work. All right, Apple Tracker. So what do we do here? So we have our listener.
That's so weird that it always fails the first time.
Oops. Okay. And we want to assert
So what did I miss? Anything?
I was just implementing nothing on the method. I was just thinking sort of.
So now, now what we want to do is we want to save the game.
Right. So now we can't call save game because save game.
I don't think we need to really. We just need to make a game snapshot, and it doesn't really matter what we put in it.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just create a snapshot and save. So we got roles 2 and completed 3 and the dice. And snapshot. Right.
I think we can just have that be empty again.
Yeah. Oops.
I believe that has to be a scoreboard, doesn't it? I think we can just create one without anything
what do we do?
else.
So it isn't scoreboards.
Are you sure we need that parameter? Doesn't it?
Oh, do we think we can not use it? No, I think.
No, I know that we need the snapshot, but does the snapshot constructor need a parameter?
The scoreboard snapshot, does that need a? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It does require, yes.
Okay. Go back to that real quick. It looked an awful lot like that. Oh, it's a record. So
it's a record. So this is a constructor that automatically. So this is the
comes in.
Yeah. So it needs to be assigned.
Okay.
And then we want to do game database save of this game snapshot. And then we're going to assert something around the output tracker.
So we want the output tracker's output, which will give us a list, to equal the game snapshot, or to contain exactly the game snapshot.
All right. We've got ourselves a test. Let's just run just this test. Is the database not running?
Is that your Docker not running?
Yeah.
Oh, because you rebooted your computer, of course.
Oh, yep. Right. Okay. It is null. Perfect. Because that's what we're returning. Awesome.
Okay, so we should be able to create an output listener in the constructor. Unless you already did that.
I did it here in the declaration.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So we should just be able to say track output or create tracker.
Create tracker, yep. That will fail not with a null, but it won't have anything because we're not putting anything into the tracker.
It'll be empty.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Could not find anything in the empty.
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, so when we save it, we should be able to emit that we've saved it.
So do you put it after the save? Do you put it right before the save? Do you put it at the top of the method?
I put it after.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It hasn't been saved unless you actually save it. So,
yeah, exactly. It's a little trickier. You know, in JavaScript, the threading model is really nice to work with because you can't have interruption.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your code is running, you're guaranteed for it to continue to run unless you await something. Here, I think really thinking about this properly would involve thinking about threading and what do we do if we have a multi-threaded environment. But
yeah, what you would do is you'd basically we'd put this in basically a transactional block or a synchronized block.
Exactly.
But I don't.
But I think this is good enough.
I don't feel the need to do
for
that.
What we're doing.
Yeah. Boy, it's really easy to use the output tracker when you already have the code written for that.
Yeah, it's really nice, isn't it? It's super easy. I've made a configurable responses class for doing response configuration as well, which basically abstracts all the stuff we've been doing with streams, if you recall.
All right, that worked.
Okay, that's good. So let's go on to making it nullable.
Should we do a commit?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right.
Okay. I think I would like, I'm going to go ahead and look at this, but I think I would like the edge cases. Yeah, let's go ahead and put the nullability down here at the bottom.
Okay.
And what I'm going to say is that saving null game, let's see, nulled save game does not write to database. So again, it's kind of the same thing. We need to be able to have a database here. We want to be able to say GameDatabase equals GameDatabase.createNull, and then save game with GameDatabase. How do we do that? New save game options. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to assert, just thinking this through.
Do you want to assert that the database is empty, or that the table, the database, so do a query, an execute query that it should be empty?
Yeah, I'm going to grab from our previous test. Except that's not a useful one. Let me look again.
You want, like 85, 86 should be empty.
85, 86, you said?
Although I guess we could just query the game table ID. We don't need the rest of that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's
so maybe enough. Like that one, yeah. And then we can assert that that's empty.
Yeah. So we'll say assert that IDs contains exactly nothing. Does that work?
You can just say is empty.
Hmm.
Yep. Oh, okay. Thank you for crashing. That must be code together. Of course you are.
Sorry, what was that?
No, code together threw an exception on my end.
Oh, yeah, that's great. I love code together.
Yeah.
It's super cool.
All right, that looks good. That looks
doable. So let's make that work.
Okay. So we'll need our create null.
Before we do this, do we want to factor out a create instead of a new?
Spring will still need the auto-wired constructor. I think I can mark a factory version of it, but somebody's still going to need to pass in and inject the game database JPA.
I mean, what I would, from a developer experience perspective, when we call GameDatabase.create, assuming we have a factory method for it, which is what we've done elsewhere,
right?
We don't care what that parameter is. That's something I would like GameDatabase to be responsible for, because it's purely an implementation detail. If we can have Spring inject that automatically, this whole thing is going to be some sort of dependency injection framework monstrosity, isn't it? Like, do you ever create a game database?
In the production code, no.
Yeah.
No, we don't. That's why I was saying we need some way that at production that this can be handed in. Well,
in that case, let's just keep
our tests that are using the real thing because they're relying on Spring need that constructor as well.
Right.
Although from our tests, we could use a create method.
Right.
And we can configure Spring to not use a constructor, but to use a factory method as long as it has it, but it's sort of non-standard.
Yeah, I think this is fine. We'll just make a create null factory.
Yeah.
And we'll pass in. Now, here's the catch, though, is that we're going to need to not pass in game database JPA. We're going to need to pass in a wrapper.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, yeah, we do need to have a create method that takes game database JPA and a null that takes nothing, and then a private constructor that wraps uh, that takes a wrapped version of game database GPA. Let me show you what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think I know where you're going.
So what we're going to have is going to look something like, oops. This. And then our null is going to look like that. And then all of this is going to call this. How do we do that? It's just return new game database, I think is what we're going to have. Does that match your understanding?
Yes, the trick is going to be
You know what? We don't have to do it this way.
Well, we can do it that way. We can basically just and this was Suiji mentioned by the at bean. We can tell we can just write an at bean method that does that.
But it might be simpler. Let me show you another option. So there's where we were before.
Mm-hmm.
It might be simpler to just do it this way.
Yeah, I mean constructors can't return, so that
I know you can call
you can
a
do
constructor from a constructor.
Yeah, you can basically do a this.
Okay, that's.
I see. Okay, yeah, I think that would. Right. So then, if the private constructor takes the wrapper, this.
Yeah, this should be game database JPA wrapper.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Then that will call this one. Yeah, that'll work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's not fight with Spring. Let's work within its preferred way of working.
Yeah, I mean, there's a way to do it, but it is one of those. It's non-standard. It's non-typical, and people who are looking for that will be confused. So I like this way.
And I like Suiji's suggestion about. No, actually, I don't. Suiji, I don't think we need to mark it as Spring only. I think that comes across anybody who knows Spring that's what the auto wired is. Yeah. And if you really want to call it for real, then you can.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world.
So this will be game database. And this is going to be the plastic constructor. It's a public constructor.
I'm going to comment out create null for now, just so we don't have too many things that we got to deal with.
Okay.
So yeah, all we need to do is create that game database JPA wrapper. And it needs to, well, first, actually, you know what? It's not game database JPA wrapper. We had another.
Isn't it the interface? Didn't we call the interface something else?
Yeah, go back to the notifier. We had a nice little pattern for this.
So here we called it.
You scroll down to the bottom, up a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So we called it wrapper is the interface.
Yeah. Wrapper is the interface. Right. Wrapper was the interface. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So here, then, what we do is we make a real game database JPA.
Right.
And then the game database JPA. I don't love wrapper actually as the interface name because it's technically not.
It isn't the wrapper. Yeah.
It's not the interface isn't a wrapper. It's just the part that we use. I mean, I would at this is the point at which I'd probably call it game database JPA interface or something like that. I know you hate it.
I know.
We could do it game database JPA interface.
Yeah, because that's so much better. Yeah, which is the lesser of two evils. I almost think interface is more obvious, and if of the two, that one to me is preferable.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that then.
All right.
And so, what do we need in here? Well, we're going to need. Where do we use game database JPA?
We use it right there. Yep. We use it basically for the save, and we use it for the find.
Okay. Yeah. So those are our two methods that we need to implement: is save, and that's it.
So I think we can actually. Think we can.
Suichi makes a really good point. We don't have to call it game database JPA. We could just call it JPA and real JPA and stub JPA.
Oh, for the internal variables. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That works for me.
That works. Yeah, because it is redundant here because we know what other database we're going to be talking to.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and go through and do that.
So what I wanted to do was, so let me just turn this one back for a second. And then
I don't think there's anything magic that's going to do what you want to do here because we don't want to implement the entire interface. We don't want to create an interface that does the whole thing.
I wanted to see if we could
you might be able to extract interface and just select the things we care about.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Yes. And so I think I can. This extracts the interface from database, which isn't quite what we want.
What if you go to game database JPA? We do have that class somewhere, don't we?
Yeah, that's basically this raw interface. And I don't know, extract interface. That doesn't help.
What if we extract interface from that?
I jump to that. That we couldn't do because it's not in our code base, so it won't let us. What I was thinking though was if I can extract a delegate, but that doesn't do what I want. Yeah, I'll have to play with. But I was thinking like could we funnel all usages of this variable? Right, because it's basically here and it would extract it for us, but I don't think it can. All right. That was just an idle thought. Okay, so we want
to make an interface for that.
So I want to make an interface for that. Right. So what we want is the interface to be the save of the type of the game snapshot.
Let me look that up.
And we want the find. Let me grab that from.
Save takes the game table.
Oh, right. Right. So just copy this and put it at the bottom. Interface. So this is our JPA. So it has. Does say return something? We're using the return value. We're not yet, but it actually does return a game table. Okay. And then the other one is optional game table. Find by ID. Yep.
That returns something that we can map. Are you sure that's an optional?
Yeah, optional can be mapped.
Okay.
What was the ID?
The only game ID is a...
So it's a long. Okay. I wasn't sure if we could wrap that with the primitive type. Wrap the primitive type. Okay. So that's our interface. So now JPA.
Real JPA should implement that interface.
Yeah. We've got two constructors.
Yeah, this is a mistake. This should be the game database JPA.
Right. Okay. So now we need a real JPA. Is that just gonna delegate to the real thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is our...
Isn't there a refactoring that will automatically implement the interface for us? Or at least scaffold it for us?
Oh, right. Actually, yes. So we can do... Oops. Implement that interface. And this is real. Whoops. Did not want to do that. Try again. Interface.
Is there not a way to just do it? Oh no, wait, there was leave in same source route.
Yeah, it'll leave in the same directory, but it won't create as an inner class. That's fine. We'll just copy it. Actually, yeah, I could do it the other way. It's a private static class. Real JPA implements JPA, and then let it do the right thing for us. There we go.
There we go.
And so this one will need access to the game database GPA.
Mm-hmm.
And that will be handed in with the constructor, which it should already be complaining about. We'll assign that. And this is just that. Save that. And then this is that.
That should work if we've done it right.
So yeah, so let's comment this out on the test side, and let's run the rest of these tests, so they should all continue to work.
Perfect.
Awesome. All right.
So yeah, should we take a break?
Yes, an excellent time to take a break.
And then when we get back, what we'll do is we'll implement the null.
Yeah.
And I don't think that will be a lot of work, although the find by ID might be a little bit tricky. We'll see how that goes.
All right. Stay tuned for that, folks. All right, we're back, folks.
Okay, yeah. So now we should be able to do the create null.
All right. And so we think that's going to be a new
Stubbed JPA.
Yeah, stubbed. Okay. So that, okay, inner class for that. It does not extend game database.
It implements JPA.
Yeah. All right. Oh, it doesn't return that. It returns new game database.
Right.
Of the news.
Sorry,
Okay.
I should have caught that. I was spacing out.
That's all right. Okay. And then we should be able to
so what did that implement for us? Is it just returning null?
Yeah, it's returning null and an empty optional.
Perfect. Yeah.
So we need on our save database options.
Actually, I think
do we need that?
Oh yeah, we haven't implemented that yet.
Yeah.
So we'll need that. That should be fairly straightforward. That should be so let me do a little bit more here. So let's put that there. And we'll default it to a new game database. Game database JPA.
Yeah, I was just going to copy line 265.
Yeah. And then this will be save game options.
Which is
game database. Okay, what am I missing? Oh, nothing. You don't have a red squiggly. I do. But,
this is red because we didn't.
It's putting that red squiggly on line 276 for me.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah, it sure is. Right, because
this is a static class. Yeah. Right. Do we want to do it this way?
You have another option?
Just seems weird. There's a refactoring that I might want to do in that, but for now it's fine. Okay, so back in here, that now compiles, and then we should be able to...
So what happens when we run that? Actually, that may be enough to make this work.
That should just work because it's literally a no op, so it should just work.
And we don't care about the result of the save. We don't pay any attention to that, so that should work.
Let's see. Yep, it does.
Okay. So now,
do we want to output track the stubbed?
We already do. It's done.
Oh, right, because we're calling this save. Never mind. I was at the wrong level of variable. Okay.
Yeah, but this sort of brings us back to what Suiji was saying earlier. Do we need to have a separate test for the output tracking? And the answer is no, because if you scroll up to where we're doing the output tracking,
right there,
it is the same.
It's the same thing.
Literally the same code.
Yep. Yeah. This is all.
And that's sort of the magic of the Nullables, is by choosing to do the stub at the next level down, all of our code is the same, which I think is really cool.
Yep.
So our next test, I think, is the nulled load game returns or provides a empty default game.
Right.
Do we have a load game helper?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So I think it's the same thing. Is we'll create the game database, and that returns us a.
Well, the helper's not going to help much here because it's just creating the game database for us. Other than that, it's just load game. So
yeah. Yeah. And then we just assert that this is a particular thing, but I'll let you do that part.
Yep. Yeah, we'll just say throw this exception here. And so then we want to assert that loaded snapshot is not empty.
It's more than that. Oh, yeah.
I mean, we could start there, or we could do a more specific, which is that it's equal to whatever we want the default to be.
Let's go ahead and just make it equal to something.
Okay. So we'll say contains exact. Can't say it because it's not a. Okay. We can say is present, and then we can say contains, and then whatever our snapshot is.
Does is present unwrap the optional?
I don't think that's necessary, so we can take that out.
Okay.
So now we just need to create our default snapshot.
And that's got a whole bunch of stuff in it, right? Well, let's just make
it is a snapshot, so it's got a bunch of stuff in it. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it really matters. So let's just go ahead and put something in there. I tend to go with sort of the most basic case when I'm doing these defaults. So the roles would be like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and the round completed would be false or 0, or whatever the first round is.
Okay. And this we can say new empty. Okay. All right.
One way to get over that icky feeling, Suiji, I think, is to remember that the nulled version is still real. So unless you're interacting with the outside world, anything that you're testing that is not talking to the outside world can be tested with a null or not, whatever's more convenient, still running the same code. So if we had done the null ability first, I probably would have tested the track output with a nulled game, just so it ran a little faster.
All right, so this, let me just run this test alone. It's going to fail because we're just returning empty, so it certainly won't pass. Yeah. Yep, that was empty.
Yeah, perfect. So now all we have to do is implement the find by ID in that.
Do we want to return game table here?
Nope.
Instead of null?
No, because the thing with doing the embedded stub is you only implement what your production code needs. You don't try to make it real. And since our production code doesn't ever read the value of game table, we don't need to return anything.
Well, it just so happens we don't use it.
Yeah, but it's not just so happens. We are programming our code to exactly match how it's used, and it doesn't use it, so we don't return it.
So the minute we do use it, if for whatever reason we do use, if we change save game to return to the snapshot, then we go ahead and implement that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, if we use the game table in some way, we need to implement it.
Yeah.
And our test would fail at that moment because now it would try to dereference a null.
Right. Okay. So should I copy and paste the snapshot?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. It's not a game table.
Oh, it's not a game table.
Oh, yeah. So this is the tricky part. We have to decompose our game snapshot into a game table. So we need to, basically do the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you grab that code that we were just looking at, line 48 through 54,
yep,
and do that, I think that will be exactly what we need. Probably need line 48 too.
Oh yeah. And so this is actually interesting because this code I would normally put in game table itself.
Oh, you would?
Yeah, because it's responsible for the transformation to and from the domain and the whatever it needs.
Yeah. Yeah, we might want to do that.
So let's refactor that first, and then we can just use it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try that.
Except to disable the test, then
it relies on these other statics that are here.
Yeah, are those used elsewhere?
They are used elsewhere. They use this participable scoreboard. I think it's all used within this code. Yeah. So let's do this. Let's
so do me a favor and disable that test first.
This test.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's just make sure. Oops. And let me undo that. Not null. Optional. Try that again. Okay. So now I can go ahead, take this, extract this to a method that's going to be a static method. And this is going to be from. And then we can take this and we can move it along with the as persistable.
Mm-hmm.
Over to game table.
Yeah, I like that change.
And let's see if that works. Yep, that looks fine.
Show me game table. Show me what we've just done.
So that hasn't changed. And now what it looks like here is we got the from, and then we got these two helper static methods.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me scroll through the tests real quick. So this was all load stuff that we're looking at here, right? So what I'm looking at is, do we want to write tests for the code we've just moved? Was that in save or load?
It's really save. The code that we moved is related to save. So, I
mean, there's nothing about our existing tests for save that really feel to me like they are specific to the code we moved. It gives me a slightly itchy feeling that we've got non-trivial logic in game table that's not directly tested.
Yep.
But at the same time, we don't need to test it.
Yeah, I mean, I generally put this kind of conversion stuff directly right up front, and then I write tests against that. And that way, when I get to the saving and loading, I don't have to worry about the conversion because I know I've got that covered.
Right.
I don't think we have so many tests.
I mean, it's indirectly covered by
it's
line
indirect,
70, for example.
Yeah, it's indirectly covered. I might go and add some other things for perhaps edge case kind of stuff, but I don't know that I'm
not sure if we have any edge cases.
Yeah, for the from, there's probably not much in the way of edge cases. The other way there might be, but we've already handled that, and that might there might be some changes there.
Yeah. Do we need a 2?
Well, we certainly are doing that. So load game is doing the from persisted game, and this to me would also belong on game table as an instance method.
From persisted game and from persisted hand and from persisted
and then
scoreboard.
whatever it calls. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and move those over.
Okay. So this.
Well, wait, don't move that one yet. Let's start out by moving. Oh no, you're right.
Well, I need to make these static so I can move them over, and then I can move this over as an instance method.
Yeah.
So from persisted, all these are going to need to be. So let's do this. I think that's fine.
That's going to get tricky. That's where our game corrupted internal exception's happening.
And is that a problem for game table to be throwing that? Because this gets called by here, and then this gets called by here, and then this gets called by here, and we catch it here. So it's still caught in the load game. So the question is, do you think that throwing this code being inside the game table, is that problematic?
Well, it's just, I don't love having runtime exceptions between classes because it's no longer an internal thing. We could think of this as all being sort of friends that, are all sort of attached together. But go back up to where we're catching that game corrupted internal exception. So we need that to be a runtime exception because otherwise the map won't work.
Right.
So let's make game corrupted internal exception. Let's make that a package level class and put it in this code as well.
Sorry, say that one more time.
I believe that's currently a static class in Game Database.
You're right. Yes, it is.
Let's move that to a file.
Okay. Okay. So, okay, so these are static, this is static, this is static. That takes care of all those. Therefore, therefore I can take this and move these over to game table.
Hey, Neighbor Kaniko, if I'm pronouncing your name right. What I would suggest is find somebody you trust to work with. Learning to code yourself, I think that's a great option for you if you want to learn. But if you're more interested in creating your app than learning, then you'll need to hire somebody. either way, it's a big deal. Hiring somebody is a big deal. Learning to do it yourself is a big deal. So I think it comes down to, would you rather spend money or would you rather learn stuff? If you're really interested in coding, then learning to code is a great option. Just understand that it will take you a little while before you can produce something that matches your imagination. But hiring somebody is really, really dangerous because there's a lot of people who will produce stuff that looks good, but is not going to last you long term.
Okay. All that was moved over all automatically. I'm just looking to see if I can tighten up. Where's this called from? That's called from here, so we can make that private. And all of our tests, I believe, pass.
Assuming you're talking about learning on your own, Narukaniku, you're going to need both. So start with whichever one, what the challenge is going to be sticking with it. So start with whatever makes you passionate.
Yeah.
If you're really excited about creating beautiful interfaces, start with the front end. If you are, if the idea of dealing with all the sort of nitpicky CSS and other little visual details sounds frustrating to you, start with the back end. But you will need both. But even if you do hire somebody eventually, knowing how the code works will allow you to vet those folks much better. And that's really going to be the challenge if you ever hire somebody, is that, again, it's really easy to be taken in by people who talk a good talk but aren't going to do a good job for you.
Yeah.
So I'd say the back end tends to be a bit easier than the front end. So in some ways, so maybe start, but the front end is a little easier to get immediate feedback. So it's sort of, again, just whatever your preference is.
And I give this advice all the time: is pick a project that you care about, because you will get to tedious, frustrating moments where you're going to throw up your hands and say, why am I doing this? And you're going to want that motivation of, you want the thing to do whatever it is you want it to do to push you past that. That's like that's almost the hardest part, is figuring out something that you care about, so that you can get past those bumps in the road.
And I would really highly recommend starting out with a framework that's designed for building web apps easily. So you're looking at either Ruby on Rails or Django as two really good options. Django being DJANGO.
And there's also no code or low code options. So there's tools that, depending on what your app is, if it's sort of database oriented, there's sort of table and spreadsheet based application development tools that you might want to look at. And sometimes that's a really good idea, because you may in your head have a good idea of what the application does, and then when you actually try to see it and in some crude form, you'll get a lot of benefit from being able to say, all right, I can picture this as a table of numbers or a table of a database table, and then you start thinking about sort of the deeper things, instead of getting hung up on what's the CSS for centering this text or something like that.
Or even just mocking it up in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Whenever I do something new for my personal family finances, especially, always start out with a spreadsheet.
Yeah. If it's at all numeric oriented, absolutely start with a spreadsheet. And there are tools that can convert that into something that you can have others look at. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're doing a to-do list, there are tutorials online that will get you started with that. It's a very popular tutorial. So
no shortage of to-do tutorials.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I would probably not start out with low code, no code, because when you run up against their limits, it's really hard to overcome those without a lot of programming expertise. Whereas something like Django or Ruby on Rails, you will literally be able to find a tutorial, probably for free, but if not, there will be some sort of paid self-guided course that will walk you through making a to-do app. And then you can do that tutorial, and Django and Ruby are either one of those two. You can start out with that to-do tutorial, take it all the way through, and then once you understand it, start customizing from there.
And the other option is do front end. There are front end frameworks, not frameworks like React or Vue, but like some simpler ones that are more static oriented, where Firebase or pre-existing database stuff. So you don't even have to write the backend. The backend's already written. You just have to configure it. And there's hundreds of tutorials on that kind of stuff. So you sort of gather together the keywords like to-do list and Firebase and JavaScript. I think you'll get more than what you need. All right, so all the code's been moved. So GameTable now has the conversion to and from stuff. So GameDatabase is now much lighter. Much lighter.
Let me take a moment to sort of scroll through it on my own.
Yeah.
So I can see it. So let's see. We've got table.from, GameDatabase.save, list around that. Well, that is pretty darn pretty. I like that. And what do we have with GameTable? So we've got the from. Where's the to happening?
The to got dropped down to the end.
From persisted game?
Yeah, so we can probably rename that as well.
Yeah, let's do that.
I usually say something like as snapshot.
Yeah.
Because then the caller looks like this. It's basically GameTable as snapshot.
Yeah, that's nice.
And let me move this up.
Yeah, thanks.
So, yeah, and so this is the way I generally do my database objects. Is they've got all the property annotation stuff in there, but also the conversion methods, and then I can directly test against this even before I've done almost anything else to make sure that stuff gets copied to and from correctly. And then once I have that, then this really becomes just a shell of it's just convert, return, and you're done.
Well, what I note here is that we are just a few minutes away from having a generic database, nullable database wrapper. If you parameterize this with GameTable, then that would be it. That would be a generic game database. Nullable database wrapper. Yeah,
where it gets tricky is find by ID is probably not the only query you're going to do. And so that's where you'll have, but you could start out with certainly as an abstract base class, even though I tend not to like hierarchies. This seems like it might be useful. But once you go beyond find by ID, and then it's, the finds are generally custom per type, start to get away from that a bit.
And I don't think we're going to make a generic database wrapper on stream because we just don't have enough to drive it from. But when people ask me, well, how do you do that? The answer is very similar to the way we did our HTTP client, which is that your configurable responses end up being you just sort of hard code what are the queries we're going to ask, and here are the responses that are going to go with each query. And from there, you can make anything nullable. Yeah.
And there are so many variations on the database side. Some people, use predicates where you pass in the predicate, and that would make it easier to do, have one nullable version that you then customize, and then based on the predicate, it can do a map lookup. But at least in the Spring Data world, people tend to use the sort of the naming conventions that behind the scenes build the right SQL. So,
yeah, that sounds like it would get a little bit uglier.
Yeah.
So I think the question still comes up for me of, do we want to have tests on GameTable or not? It is all being tested indirectly through GameDatabase.
Right.
It's all in the same folder. I don't really feel like going out and writing a whole bunch of tests around it when we've already got it tested. So I might just put a comment on the top of it saying these methods tested by game database test.
Yeah, I mean, I might do it, but it certainly is not something I think we would do on stream. Because it's pretty tedious. You're just making sure stuff gets copied. I don't think it's particularly enlightening to do on stream. I might do it just because, and it wouldn't be a lot. So like when I write tests against this, it's generally like 2 tests. Right.
Yeah,
it's did it copy it from and did it copy it to and did all the stuff get copied?
So you're not doing. I mean, what I'm thinking about the from and to is not such a concern to me. It's the as persistable scoreboard,
right. And yeah, so for those, then I might write some more tests. And even though these are technically don't need to be public, I might make them package access, and just because they're static, I would just write tests directly against those. But again, not a lot.
Yeah. But again, I think on this one, I'd just be like, you know what? This is covered. It is tested through Game Database. Yeah. The thing is because of the way we've tested Game Database, we can't really move any of these tests. Like all those tests that we have on Game Database are relevant.
Right.
I think the ones, what we might be able to get rid of is the edge cases, some of the edge cases. But even then, I mean, that's pretty specific. So what we would end up doing is just duplicating the tests rather than moving the tests, and that to me doesn't feel super valuable.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the database constraint, that one we'd have to leave because that's about the database constraint. This one we could move because it's about the category being wrong, and that's captured at the.
Except, I mean, I guess these 3 tests are all different variants of the same thing, which is that we're converting the game corrupted internal exception into a game corrupted exception.
Right.
So yeah, maybe these 3 could collapse down into one test if we put the tests on game table. And then the test name would be something like throws exception when
not valid.
When game table not valid or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, I don't feel like it has a lot of value. So
I agree. So
okay, so should we go back to Game Database and do our nullability?
Yes. All right. So now,
I would typically put a comment on game table saying that this is being tested through.
That's why I was here.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, but now we have the ability to just take our snapshot, that's our default.
Right. Which I got somewhere. There it is. And then we can say game table from snapshot. I said empty.
And why is that good?
Because you can't hand in something to empty.
Yeah.
All right.
So Nirkaniku, nullability is the ability to have a production code like our game database wrapper, which is a class in our code that is meant to give us access to the database to load and save our game state. And the game we're creating is called Yacht. It's a sort of poker game, dice poker game. It's kind of like Yahtzee. And game database is how we save the game and load it so that when people, when the server shuts down and restarts, the games are still there. Making it nullable means that in our tests, we have the ability to save and load games without actually talking to a real database. And there's reasons you'd want to do that in production too, but we're doing it here to make it possible for our tests. So it worked?
It worked.
Excellent.
I feel like we're overdue for a commit.
Yeah, I think so too. I was about to say the same thing. I'm not sure what you mean by an empty memory reboot, Nirkaniku, so I can't say. Oh, if you mean like if you're to reboot and clears out the memory, yeah, having it in a database means that we can get it back. And that's what this game database class is for, is to be able to save and load the game from the database. Load game.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, we probably should have checked in after doing the move.
I got distracted.
That's all right.
All right. Oops. That's weird. Go away. All
okay,
right.
so the next thing we need to do is we need to be able to provide a configured game.
Right.
Do we want to have the ability to provide multiple configured games?
Well, right now we can only have one game.
That's a very good point.
So the answer is no.
Yeah, no, you're right.
There is just
I forgot how fantastic our system was.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that case, mind if I write a test?
Go for it. That's right. You can load any games you want as long as it's the one.
So what are we doing? Null game provides configured game. So we'll create the null. This will be a configured snapshot. When you move between words using option right arrow, Ted, does it treat like configure snapshot as 2 words?
Yes, and there's a preference setting to do that. So
where is that? Because
they call it camel humps. And so under editor general smart keys, use camel humps words and honor camel humps when selecting. I have this one set, but it's the use camel hump words that.
Thank God. It's been driving me nuts.
I don't know why that's not the default. I think
it is. I think it's, well, it is on WebStorm. Like I didn't set that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think it was that way before. I think it's just code together is.
Oh, interesting.
Weird.
Okay.
Again, it could be because I don't have a registered version of it, of IntelliJ. I don't know.
No, I can't imagine. That's such a fundamental editor feature.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like it's working now.
Oh, yeah, I just changed it.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I set it, like the setting was there, it just was turned off.
Oh, it was turned off. Okay. Yeah, that's why I was wondering, it's like, how did it get turned off? Unless it was defaulted to turn off.
It did default to turn off, but I don't know why it defaulted on this editor and not on WebStorm. And also, I copied all my settings over from WebStorm when I first set up IntelliJ. So I don't know.
All right.
So anyway, we're going to assert that the. What am I doing here?
You moved the assert up, but I don't think you wanted to move the assert up. You want to configure it, but you want the assertion after, right?
Yeah, that should be what it's showing now. Yeah, no, don't touch that. Okay. I've already moved it. Something's wrong with your.
Oh, that's
your configuration.
No, I think
I just wrote hi Ted. Did you see it?
Nope.
Okay, that's just charming.
I think you got disconnected.
I think so too. All right. Well, go together strikes again.
Let me close it and reopen it. Oops. Nope. Still.
Okay, well, go ahead and you know what needs to happen. So go ahead and do it.
So this.
Yeah, and I'm gonna disconnect on my end.
So we're gonna want. So we want another createNull method that takes the configured.
Yeah.
Because there's the default and then there's the configured. So we want another one. Okay. So now we're going to have to figure out how do we get that to our stub. We do new game database, new stubbed, and then that one takes a configured snapshot. And then that one is a constructor. We will also have the no argument constructor. And it's create a field for that. And then I think we can move. Oh, I basically take this.
Happy Holy.
And
I had the good fortune of being in India for the Holi festival with my kids several years ago.
Oh,
It was
wow.
a great experience.
Okay. Let's do that. Is that right?
I would probably implement that by having the no parameter constructor call the parameter constructor.
Oh, sure. Then we can make that final.
So it looks like your Code Together server has crashed or something, Ted.
It has. It has. It just ended its session.
Yeah, don't worry about it. We'll set it up again in the next break, I think.
All right. Let's see. I guess I should run the tests. I guess I implemented too much before I ran the test because we didn't see it fail.
Did we not?
No.
Oh.
So I'm going to comment that out.
No, that's the wrong... Oh, no, that is the... well, that's okay.
Let's do that.
Now we should see 2 tests fail because...
Oh, because the default one is using the... Yeah, all right. That's at least I see this one fail. That's
yeah.
But you predicted correctly that 2 would fail.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's totally fine. And now both should pass.
Do me a favor. I don't love that both tests are using the same data.
Yeah,
I was passing by coincidence.
Yep. Let's configure this differently. I think we can leave the scoreboard.
I don't care about that.
Yeah. Actually, I should have. Anyway, doesn't matter. Still passes. All right.
That's it. We're done. We've made it nullable.
That wasn't so hard.
No, this is why, people always come to me and say, well, how do you do databases? I'm like, well, just like you do everything else. You stub out the underlying thing that you're using. Do we want to be able to simulate the corrupt games? I think if we do Suigi, I think that's something that we will add in the future. Do we want to be able to simulate the corrupt games?
We want to be able to simulate the corrupt games.
I mean, yes, we are going to want to be able to. We are going to be able to want to do that when we start programming support for loading games. We're going to need to handle that case.
Yes, right. And so then we're going to need to be able to configure the stub JPA with basically a game table that's not valid.
I think we might as well do that now because we're in here, and we will need it pretty much immediately. This isn't an obscure side case. This is something that we'll need right away, because we're going to do try catch, and we're going to say, well, let's force ourselves to write that code.
Right.
So the only tricky thing about that, I think actually making it throw an exception is going to be easy, because we'll just, like you said, create a game table that's got crap in it. The trick is, how do we do the configuration? So right now we're passing the game snapshot. This is again where, a union data type would be nice, because we could say either a configured snapshot or a error. We could add. So in JavaScript, the way I do it is, because we have optional parameters, I just provide 2 parameters. And if the error parameter is set to something, then I throw an exception. I make it throw an exception.
So we want to configure the stub JPA to just throw an exception, and configure it to throw an exception, or do we want to provide it with bad data?
We'll provide it with bad data, because we're running through the same code path.
So then we're providing basically a game table object.
Yeah.
So then we're configuring it with either a snapshot or a game table? No,
because the game table is an internal implementation detail.
Right. So that's what I was getting at, is the configuration of null is use the snapshot or throw this exception?
No.
Okay.
The configuration is either use the snapshot or throw your own exception. We're not going to provide it the exception to throw. We don't have that control. We want it to just throw whatever exception it will throw.
Right. So I wasn't saying specify the exception. I was saying act as if the game table is corrupted.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's basically a bool. It's 2 states: throw an exception or return this snapshot. One way we could do that is to just have a create null that throws an exception, like create null with exception, or create null that is corrupted.
Create exceptional null. Yeah, create null, create corrupted null. I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Now, so Luigi's pointing out the lambda which is sort of what I was thinking of, is instead of accepting the configuration as an object, accept it as a supplier of snapshots, but that the supplier could throw an exception. I don't know if I like that as much.
Yeah. Go ahead and scroll down on the left. Down further. Down to our save game options.
Okay.
We could do something like this. I don't think it's not as magical as using the lambda, which I think would get pretty confusing. But that would give us the options. We could say, and the reason we want to do something like this is that in the future, if we're returning multiple values, we might want to say, return a game, return this snapshot, throw an exception, return this snapshot, return this snapshot. Right. So basically what we would pass in is a little object that is in either here's the game or here's the exception state. But for what we need right now, and probably pretty much forever, I don't know that we're going to need to return multiple values.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm unclear about why we'd need that I wouldn't feel comfortable implementing it.
Yeah, we can just do that when we need it.
Exactly, yeah.
I think the simplest way to do this right now is create null, create corrupted
null, yeah. So we'll start with the test.
Yep.
So corrupted, how do I want to say null, corrupted null.
How about just null load game throws exception?
How about load game throws exception with corrupted null?
Yeah. Or when corrupted null, when null is corrupted.
You don't like with?
Yeah, with is fine.
And so we will create our game database. We will say create corrupted null.
Mm-hmm.
And that will get assigned to the game database. Create that method. Does nothing just yet. And then we're going to say game database, load game, assert that thrown, assert that one. Yes. And that's fine for now. Oops. Thought you were gonna convert this to. So I thought you were gonna do slow game.
I think you've got an extra parenthesis in front of game database.
I do. I don't know why that cares though. That was. Okay.
I think you've got an extra parenthesis at the end of load game as well. It's supposed to be a bare function, right?
Oh, that's fine. Yes. It was complaining about the parentheses themselves, not the wrong number. Well, I guess that's technically the wrong number.
It was both. You had too many. You had just too many parentheses.
Too many parentheses. Because it didn't. Because I'm not used to converting it manually. Because it didn't convert it for me. All right. This will most.
That's it.
Certainly fail.
We will get an exception. That test is going to pass.
Oh, it's gonna because it's going to be a null pointer exception.
Yeah. That's right. We'll just declare that it's a game corrupted exception. Oh, it's probably saying that method doesn't exist.
No, it's a null pointer exception.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how come the test failed?
Because it couldn't even.
Right. It couldn't even create find it.
Yeah. So we can say, I mean, we could leave it, or we could say that's an instance of.
Well, let's go ahead and take our break.
Yep.
Second break. And then when we come back, we will implement this.
All right. Sounds good. Stay tuned, folks. All right. And we're back, folks. And James is reconnected with Code Together, so we can continue.
Yep. For now.
For now. For at least a minute or two.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's like, what were we doing? Oh yeah, so we got a null pointer exception because we're returning null. So now we need to figure out how we're going to pass along the idea of a corrupted null.
Well, first let's just call the same as line 35 and get to the point where we're seeing a failure.
Right, we want to see the right failure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now it fails the right way.
So making this a throw-in exception is going to be really easy. I think it's just a question of how do we want to implement this? Because we need to, we've sort of punted down. We still need to construct stub JPA in the force an exception to happen state. And we can call a factory method on it that does it. We can do an override that passes in, like we could pass in true for a Boolean.
What do you think about creating another implementation of the JPA interface called corrupted JPA?
I don't love it, but that may be my bias talking. Let me take a look at the code. So right now, game days, we have stub JPA. The reason I don't love it is because this only affects find by ID. Save is the same in both cases. Now, it turns out that save is really simple, so duplicating that's not such a big deal. But if we had real code in there, like if we were actually doing something there, I wouldn't want to duplicate that. So I think, I mean, what we're going to do is on line 117, really what we're going to do is we're going to factor this out, and I would factor it out if my refactoring actually worked. Yeah.
Well, we'd factor out the difference would be instead of return anything, we would just throw the exception, right?
No, we can't throw an exception. We have to orchestrate.
Oh, of course, because the table still needs to be returned. Right. Okay, then actually, I take back my suggestion.
Yeah.
I keep getting confused about what level we're at. Right, so we would have to return a corrupted game table in the optional, right? So we'd factor that out.
Right, because we want to trigger the exception handling logic so that the null runs the same code as the production code.
Yep.
And that is the unique thing about the nullables is that they run the same production code. But you're right, it's a little bit of a brain twister in that. And also all the stuff we have to do, like we're decomposing what we want down into, a lower level thing to make it cause the behavior we want rather than just doing the behavior we want. That's definitely weird. But I think it's very powerful because now we're exercising our code the same way.
Yeah. So I think
I have an idea.
Yeah.
So I think, this is what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And and then what we pass through into stubbed APA is not the snapshot, but the game table.
Yep.
And this would need to be a stubbed JPA. I kind of want to say create with default or just even with like this, or maybe as.
Yep. I like that much better. Yep.
Okay. And let's call it as configured. Yeah, so this will take the game snapshot.
Right.
And that won't take anything, and that won't take anything.
Right, and so the field would be not a snapshot, but a table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that still works. I'm going to let you take it from there.
Yeah. And so then the default is that, and this is that, and so
don't lose that default that you grabbed.
I got it. Yep. Did you know that IntelliJ has a clipboard history?
I did not know that.
So Command V is paste. Command Shift V brings you the last 10, actually more than that, the last number of items, and then allows you to paste it as is or copy from what it's showing and all sorts of stuff. So
that's a great hint. That works in WebStorm too.
It'll work. That'll work.
Yeah, I just tried it. I very carefully orchestrate when I'm doing stuff, like I'll cut and then I'll undo and then I'll undo, I'll grab something and then I'll redo and I'll paste it back in. But having this ability is
now you can be more cavalier like I am.
Yeah. All right. So,
So we want as default to be the one that has the one I just pasted. So that's going to be.
where did you paste it?
It's right. Or
There.
it was
Okay.
pasted,
Copied.
whatever. Copied. That was the word. And we want to do that. And then this is.
So you need to do under new stub JPA on line 105, turn that into a table.
Like so. I can change this to be that. Yeah, just go ahead and do that. And then this is a table. That didn't change the constructor. I thought it was going to change, but whatever. So that one we'll have to figure out.
Yeah.
Because this is our corrupted one. So I'll put that for now. That's configured. Yep. And then the default. Yep. And then this.
So we're going to need to change our
this is game table.
And then up at the top, our overall factory methods.
Right.
You need to use the new ones.
So this is just.
It's not new stub JPA. It's stub JPA dot as default.
This one is not that, but it's configured. And this one is it's corrupted.
And this actually answers the question of how do we, if we were returning multiple ones, how would we deal with it? Rather than using that optional thing, or the game options type of thing, or the nullability options or something like that, we would just make a configurable, game database dot configured response, and then the configured response dot as default, as configured, as corrupted.
All right, so I think we're back with just the one test failing.
I hope so.
Oh, it passed?
Just the no test failing. How come no test failing?
Oh, because
we're getting the null pointer exception.
Because we're getting a null pointer exception, yes.
Okay, so let's fix the assertion to assert on the right thing.
So we want to say is exactly instance of, what do we expect here?
Game corrupted exception.
Game corrupted. So now this will fail because the exception is null instead of what we want. Or it's null pointer instead of what we want. And it is. Perfect.
Perfect.
All right.
Now we're rolling. Now what we need to do is make a game table that just has bad data in it.
Yep. That was weird. So how do we want to corrupt it?
I think we can set the roles to be. Do we need to set all this stuff?
I think as soon as we set anything bad, I mean, we can set roles to negative number. We can set the hand to something weird.
Oh, yeah, I said roles, but what I meant was the current hand. Let's set current hand to just be invalid. And then I don't think we need to set. Oh, yeah, I guess we kind of want to. I don't think we even need to set that. We could just
let's see.
Set the current hand to invalid.
Yep.
Bingo. And we don't even care what the error message is.
What is the error message? Oh, we don't even see it.
Yeah, because there won't be one.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we care about unless we, well, we care if we care, right? I don't think we care. We know if we care yet.
I don't think we are going to care personally, because
that's not something that like the user could recover from. So it's probably not something we'd forward to the UI.
Well, and also, I generally don't present exception error messages to the user because they're usually made by programmers.
Yeah.
And Lord knows they can't write. So yeah. I mean, if we wanted to actually present some data to the user, what we do is we make an exception with structured data in it.
Right. All right.
So we're done.
Let's commit.
So I think we ended up pretty close to what you did for your spike. I know it wasn't really a spike, but when they did that branch that sort of put this stuff together. The major difference, I suspect, is the way we did the tests.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and let's do a compare and contrast with what we've done here versus the way you originally did it. See if there's anything interesting to learn from that. And then delete the duplicate.
So in our JPA,
so your game DBO, is that the same as game table? Okay. Did that end up the same?
I had a one-to-many, but that's arguably similar. I have my from snapshot, which is the same thing. In fact, that's exactly the same.
The difference is that the set scored category DBOs as opposed to set scoreboard.
Right, because I have then a DBO, and this one has the its own sort of from and to. In this case, just converting it. So it can return a score category, or it can take a score category DBO and return.
I see. So you didn't have a score category snapshot like we do.
Yeah, I think, well, I've got the scoreboard snapshot here.
Okay.
So it is converting from the snapshot to a list of these DBOs. Which grant is...
Oh, score categories in 48, line 48. That's not I was confused.
Yeah, sorry. This is the enum. This is the actual score plus the value. Score plus basically the hand of dice. And I let it store the hand of dice this way.
It occurs to me that
versus us converting it to a string here.
It occurs to me that game table is not a great term for it. It's really more a representation of a single row than a table.
Yeah.
Do you want to make that change? Rename it to game row?
Yep.
Or game table row?
How far do we want to rename stuff? I think that's all good. Just for tests. Yeah, so DBO structure was slightly different.
But mostly the same. Wait. Oh, we got some failures.
Oh, did it go too far in its rename?
Oh, you know what that did is it changed some of our column names. Why would it have changed the column names though? Because we have some auto-generated ones somewhere.
It's probably this one.
Yep.
Now
let's keep it as game table. Because game table ID I like better than game. Well, I don't love that.
I mean,
we should just specify it.
We can specify it. Because this is the collection table, and we can say the join. I forget what we do. Foreign key. Is this the foreign key? I don't know. I'm not gonna. I'll rename that offline because I do.
What'd you say?
I'm going to rename it offline. I'm not going to do the tedious figure out what the syntax of the,
All right.
of the thing
Fair
is
enough.
here.
So yeah, let's go ahead and
So I'm
change
going to
that
undo
back
that.
then.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to GameDBO and
Yeah, I just
continue
want to make
looking
sure
through
that everything's back to.
You know, when you ran the test, I thought, well, I'm glad you're running the test, but that seems redundant to me because the refactorings always work.
When for renames, when there's so much, I'm always running tests because they just don't take much time.
I want to call out here though that this only failed tests because we were testing the structure of the database.
Right.
And that's why we want to do it.
Yep. Yeah, if it were anything else, I probably wouldn't have. But I think my internal, nope. I think that went further than you thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if we'd had the types of tests that you had planned on having, where you're just saving to the database and loading back from, the test would have passed there.
Right. And again, that goes back to like, do we ever expect anybody to be touching the database outside of our application or not?
Do we care about the structure of the database?
Yeah.
Except that we do care about the structure of the database as soon as we have data that we're keeping.
Right. In which case you're using migration scripts and stuff like that. So it's more well defined. So back to our DBO. So we've got our from and to. So I call it to domain here.
Yeah. But that's basically, if you go down, you have as snapshot. That should be pretty much the same code.
Yeah. This is a little simpler because we're not doing the persisted, because the persisted scoreboard is handled by the DBO. So that's what this collection thing is doing here. And the persisted hand, we don't really have to do much because on this side, it's a list of integers.
Oh, you programmed it as a list of integers?
Yeah.
Okay. Why didn't we do that in this case?
I don't remember.
I remember that we talked about it and we're like, I think we just had trouble figuring it out.
It might have been, which, one of the nice things about doing this on a recording is you can always look back as like, what was I thinking? And as a side note, I tell people like, record yourself doing stuff, especially when you're practicing, because you may do things or say, why did that go wrong? And sort of being able to, as they used to say, go to the videotape is such a luxury that I think when you have it, it's really like, oh, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. I mean, once you get over how weird your voice will sound, it's so, that's, first time you start listening to yourself being recorded, it's always like, do I really sound like that?
Right,
it's like, yeah, actually. But once you get over that, I find it incredibly valuable to watch the recordings that I've done of myself, because what I remember doing and what actually happened are dramatically different.
Yeah.
And I think it's because as you're thinking, like your brain just disconnects a little bit.
Yeah, because it's all using all its energy to try to solve the problem and not remember what's actually happening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's great advice. So scroll on down.
The rest is just properties here.
That's all the same.
Yeah.
So the main difference is that our from and our to is more complicated, and that really boils down to the way we did the hands of dice.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, here we said we were trying to get to work as an array, and I think that misled us. If I had just done element collection, that would have been just fine. So there you go.
Yeah.
So other than sort of specifics on how we persisted the scoreboard, we decided we just wanted it as this way instead of a separate object, and how we persisted this. Otherwise, they're basically the same.
Okay, and now let's look at. But I think the way the exception handling is being done is different.
Yes.
So we don't really have the same issues with game corruption though in the one you made, because it's not possible for that string to be incorrect.
Right.
So I'm actually glad we went down that route, because showing how to deal with corruption data, which really does happen, is useful.
So I called it momentum here.
This ended up being pretty much the same thing, I think, other than the fact, of course, it's not nullable.
Right.
But if you scroll up just a little, that's the same. right there. We've got the tracking. Of course, that's different. What's above that? Is that just our factories?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the save is pretty much identical.
Here I return back the object only because I've got tests that use it. I'm not actually using it in production. But other than that,
and I think that's
exactly
just
the same.
That's a fairly minor design decision. Like, do we want the persistence layer to be aware of the domain or not? And I could go either way on that, I think.
So the reason I return the object right now doesn't matter because there's only one ID, but eventually you're going to want to know what was the ID of the thing we just saved so that you can pass that ID back to the consumer and so that they can interact with the right game. So that's when it'll matter if we need that. But otherwise, here we do, I don't know why I didn't combine this into one thing. So here, basically, I basically throw just a general exception if anything goes wrong.
Yeah, so ended up, I think, being very, very similar. The major difference being the string stuff that we did.
Right.
Which it did end up leading to some nice sort of sidetracks in terms of modifying hand of dice to be a little bit more robust.
Right.
And so forth.
Yep.
Okay.
This is bugging me for some reason. There we go.
Well, there's no need to modify that because I think what we're going to do next is delete it.
Yeah, I just want to see, like, did I do that for a reason or was it just something left over? It's like, that's the way it would look. I'm just trying to make it look a little bit more like this one.
Mm-hmm.
But yep, now we can. So before we get rid of it, where are we specifying which one gets used is the question. So here, we're just doing a GameService create. So it's currently using an in-memory version of the repository. So we could replace that with the real thing and our create null.
So create shouldn't be using an in-memory game repository. It should be using the real one.
Right.
That's create traits of GameService in-memory. Like, shouldn't that be injected for us by Spring?
We would have.
Oh no! Oh, I see. I mean, now we're getting into we've got this game database. Let's use it.
Right.
Yeah. But before we do that, I think we should finish cleaning up after ourselves with the game database.
Yeah.
And delete the duplicate implementation.
Yeah. Let's do anything to commit. Yeah, that's fine.
I don't think we've done anything yet, have we?
No, I just deleted so. And just a minor commit, just so I have a commit point right before we do the delete stuff. So we can supposedly delete the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Gonna run those tests.
Do you have a run all tests?
That's what I'm going to run next.
Okay.
And voila. Tis gone. All right.
Okay.
So deleted heads.
So yeah, I think really the difference came down to, other than the string stuff, it really came down to how did we test it and the fact that it was nullable.
Right.
That was the significant difference.
Yeah.
And if we were to, go back in time, we could have taken your existing code, written the new tests on that existing code, made it nullable. and it would have ended up in pretty much the same place as we are now.
Yes. Yeah, we could have at least started with the DB already had and just start from there.
Yeah, we could have.
Yeah. But as you said, like because we did it the way with the strings and stuff, I think that was really led us on some really good trails.
Yeah. I mean, from a database design perspective, I don't love that we're serializing to and from strings.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of screwy. I like what you have a little bit better. I mean, I don't know what it looks like under the tape covers, but just the fact that we're using real data types is better in my mind.
Yeah.
But now we can put it in a box and set it aside and not worry about it. So,
and what would be interesting, and I don't know if we ever want to do this, but let's say it's like, oh, we want to change the database structure because we want to now input, we want to have in place migration scripts and all that. What would that take?
Yeah.
And it would be pretty tightly confined to just the table row, I think.
Mm-hmm. It would be, yeah. Okay, so
GameService is taking a game repository, and so
game repository was imaginary.
It was basically the port for repositories, and right now there's now only the in-memory implementation version.
Right,
and so we want to replace this with what we have.
We could theoretically replace it with GameDatabase. But so let's talk about the structure. So we've got half an hour left. I think what we can do is do some sort of design work and talk about general approaches. But if you could open up the files again. So if we think about how things flow through, when the application starts up, it starts a web server. And then when the user hits the page, they're going to go to your in adapters. Specifically one of these, yacht controller. That's going to be provided with a game service at some point. That game service, does that currently do a load? Does the load happen implicitly?
So the start basically creates a game and saves it. The execute and save finds it, runs the operation, and then saves it. So it's always doing load, do operation, save for every operation.
Right. So this is where we can finally start talking about different approaches to architecture. I think we could obviously modify this to just use the game database, but I don't know that would be super interesting because it would just be sort of a find and replace on the existing stuff. Are you interested? So is that a route you're interested in going down?
I mean, we could do it, but I'm more interested in what else we could do.
Well, when you say we could do it, which of those options were you referring to?
I mean, we could just do a replace of game repository with game database. I don't think that's terribly interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, it should work, but I don't think that's interesting.
Yeah. So I would like to explore the option of getting rid of game service.
Right. Yeah.
I think that would be, that could be really interesting.
Yes.
So do you still have the fancier version of my little card?
Not that one. Hold on.
It's in there somewhere.
There it is. Oh, that's still the coffee break. There it is.
Hey! So I think, the way you approach hexagonal architecture, which I think is not so much hexagonal architecture as Ted's hexagonal architecture. The way you approach hexagonal architecture is very similar to the way I do A-frame architecture, in that you have gone to some fairly extensive efforts to make sure that infrastructure and logic are completely separated.
Yep.
And your game service is acting at the application UI level in this picture. The major difference that I think remains between our two approaches is that you consider the web controllers to be in adapters, and I put them at the top of this picture in the application UI part. And because your view adapters are in adapters, and they're under app infrastructure, it doesn't make sense for them to be traffic cops. You've got the game service acting as sort of the traffic cop, and the view just sort of delegates to the game service,
right,
which then turns around and does stuff within infrastructure, the out adapters and the logic.
Right.
So you've got in going to game service, going to out, and logic. Do you have your hexagonal that you could pop up?
By the way, one thing I've been talking about, and I talked about this in my latest version of my talk, is I talk about these as separation of concerns architectures, because there's this general principle of separating I/O concerns from domain logic, that different, clean versus onion versus hexagonal versus A-frame, they just separate it in different ways, but they all have this strong, some of them add dependency inversion, some don't, but they all have this very strong sense of, why are tests so hard? Because you got I/O mixed in, and that makes it really hard to get at everything else. Yeah. So you've got your, where's your in this? Yeah. So there's your in. So for you, it's in to application to out. Right.
And if you could put mine back up for a moment. Yeah. I think I can't draw on the screen like you can, but if I were to draw on the screen, I would put an in sort of up here in the upper left, pointing to application UI. That's sort of how yours is configured.
Right.
The major difference with A-frame architecture is that the in and is the UI part of application /UI, that they are considered at the same level and they're driving everything else. So what that means, and I'm sort of making this up as I go, what that means is that I'm inclined to want to get rid of game service and instead have the yacht controller take its place. Now, I know you've had concerns before. Well, what if we have multiple?
And it's not a what if. There are two adapters that talk to the game service. There's the yacht controller one, but there's also the one that supports the view API. So it's basically a RESTful API that also talks to the game service.
Yeah. So the way I would deal with that is that, and I think we're just going to have to sort of explore this and see where it comes out. And I don't know if it will come out well or not, because I've not done this with Spring, and there may be some constraints around Spring. But the way I think I would approach that is I would have an application entry point. Right now, your yacht controller is your application entry point, and your view equivalent view controller is your application entry point. Can you pull up that view controller just so we can compare it? Yeah. So they're very similar. The major difference is going to be, well, on stuff like roll result, where you're actually having to add stuff to the model so it displays stuff on the screen, whereas your view controller is just a sort of an API backend, right?
Right, because it's just returning JSON to represent the stuff. It's not worrying about how the view is going to be formatted and conversion for that.
Yeah.
So the conversion is lighter. The conversion is lighter weight.
Yeah. Go and pull up the game service again. The reason that this game services bug me, as I've mentioned before, is it just feels like a thin wrapper over the game logic. So,
which it is, and so the way the way sort of the where it came from in hexagonal is from this idea that the service is a use case layer, right? So you
like a transaction script layer.
Basically, you know, because you're not just calling a method on a command, you gotta load it, but that's infrastructure. But there are other effects. You may load something from, you know, here, get some information, and then call something else. And so there's the sort of the coordination across either multiple domain object sets, you know, with aggregate kind of thing, as well as though I want to, as a result of this, send out a notification, this game is complete and here was the score. So there are these side effects that happen based, you know, sort of broadcasting events kind of thing of as a result of things happening in the domain. And so the game service is responsible for sort of that layer of operations, as opposed to just sort of the rules and process in the domain. So it is definitely this coordinator among multiple other pieces.
Right. At the same time, I mean, it's, well, you particularly see it right here. When I see code like that, it makes me twitch a little bit. When I see just
you know,
forwarding along.
Right. I mean, if it's only exclusively delegating, I agree, then the layer might not be necessary. But given that this is a trivial game, that's, you know, and there's only one of them, that's going to happen.
So let's look at how we could do this differently. How come this is not automatically commenting for me? Oh well.
Hey, Kuros, application orchestration. Yeah, I don't like the word orchestration, although that's because orchestration means something different from coordination. But yeah, it's the idea of that regardless of how the thing got triggered, whether it was somebody using a web UI or somebody sending in a REST request or somebody sending in a Kafka message, the intent is, I want something done, and here's the information to do it with. And that should be, you know, if that's basically the use case, right? I want to, you know, transfer money from one account to another, sort of the typical thing. Well, okay, you got to load both accounts and transfer and check for things, and that coordination, some of the logic is in the domain, making sure you've got enough money and making sure you have, you know, maybe right permissions, but loading those and maybe checking some of the external service to see how your credit report is, and then coordinating that and then executing it. That's the job of the application layer. And to me, from a testability standpoint, if you put it into the controller, you've now intertwined that with I/O, and that's my main concern.
Well, I'm not saying put it in the controller.
Yeah.
Although if we only had one controller, I probably would, because I don't care. Because it's application I/O, or it's application UI. The UI often is doing a lot of orchestration work. So if I've only got the one UI, then that's where I'm going to put it, because that's where it's happening. So, but in your case, because you actually have two things, I think there is another way of doing it.
Okay.
The main thing is I want the domain layer to be sort of front and center. I want to talk to the domain and have the work that's happening in the domain really obvious and be worked from directly, because especially when you have a complicated domain, you aren't going to necessarily have a single facade on top of it without it turning into a God object that has a whole bunch of different methods that do a bunch of different things with different parts of the domain.
So I wouldn't do that, because I would then have separate use case implementations that handle each subset of whatever operations are. In fact, so it's actually a code smell when I see somebody have a service and it has 60 different methods that are really handling 4 different, you know, major capabilities that really and what often happens is then you have 12 different collaborators because this one needs these 3, this one needs these 4. It's like, that's a code smell, split them out. And there are various ways to split it out. One is a command method, command object like way of doing it. And another is just you create a separate use case service class for each use case.
But still, regardless, let's explore what would happen if we got rid of GameService. That we do not want to repeat ourselves between view controller and yacht controller. And we want to have, remember how I talked way at the beginning, I want to have a situation where you can trace through from main and see everything that's happening. So what I'm imagining, and again, I'm not sure how this will work out. We'll have to experiment with it, see what happens. But what I'm imagining is something along the lines of, in our top level application code, so this is our app class that sort of gets everything going. And I know this is not what you actually have, but we can map this. Are you seeing what I'm typing here?
I am seeing it, yes.
Yeah.
Yay!
Okay. Hallelujah. In our application class, what we want to do is start the server. We want to say that on event, do something. And when we want to say, so on UI dot event, new game, blah, blah, blah. And we want to say something like on game dot change event, or change, do something. I don't know if we want this one or not. But this was sort of the core idea I've thought of. Mostly of what GameService is doing is loading the game, running the same method that's been called on it, and then saving the game. What if we put the load and save game as sort of a global behavior at the application level? And the way we trigger the save game is by the game itself saying, I'm ready to be saved. I have changed, save me. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, we start the server. Let's see. So when a request comes in, we load the game, process the request, save the game. That's ultimately what I want to do. And the on-event stuff was more about, well, how do we make this work with Swing? Or not Swing, Spring.
Yeah, I mean, that process is currently encapsulated in a single method that takes an object to do the actual process request. It does do sometimes a little bit of extra work to do the, if there is side effects, like I want to notify because you did something specific. And this is where you could encapsulate this in sort of a command object, right? And then the implementation just implements the request, which is really just executing a method on the object that was just loaded. So that looks fine.
And the save game, the reason to have the event is because we don't know that the save game, the process request, is going to change the game.
Right.
So, then that leads to that. I think that's sort of the nutshell of what I've got going on. And then in process request, Now we can say things like game dot do logic, and that will trigger back to us to save the game. That way our request handlers, our controller, doesn't have to worry about the, it can talk directly to the domain.
So,
did you say something? Because you froze up for a second.
Oh, sorry. Actually, I was thinking. So I think in general networks, it's the details that I'm not sure.
Well, and now that I look at it, I'm not sure if I like it, because we've got things like doing the notifier that isn't generic, right? Like the loading and saving games is generic, but the notifier is not.
Right.
And the view controller, if that's also notifying, like,
well, if the view controller causes something to change, like you've assigned a category, right? It's not the controller's responsibility to handle side effects. That's the way I look at it. It's the application that's responsible for saying this thing happened, so we need to do this thing.
I think it would come down to something like this to handle the notifier. Is we'd have the logic layer starting to do multiple types of different events.
Yeah, and so I'm not clear on how that's much of an improvement.
Because I didn't say this was going to be an improvement. Okay. I said let's experiment with getting rid of GameService and see where it takes us.
Yeah, I think it's this stuff that to me I like that it's separate. There's some interesting stuff about like how do you know the game needs to be saved? That's something that the domain might be able to tell you. In fact, maybe it could do it itself. There's also has something significant changed that I need to tell somebody about. That there's actually some really interesting ways that I've explored around events, and so that the domain objects generate basically domain events, and then it's up to the application layer to interpret those events and then say, oh, this thing happened, let me go notify this other thing.
Now, I don't generally love events as a flow control mechanism. I call them spooky action at a distance, because
it's definitely a trade-off, because yes, you do lose all track of sort of
where does stuff come from?
How did this happen? Who calls this? And if I do this, then what happens?
Yeah. I mean, this sort of bug I got in my bonnet really came down to seeing this pattern. Although I wonder if have you changed it since we first started working on this?
Yeah. So it didn't, there wasn't any difference because everything was in memory. But once the repository was loaded up, and especially once we had, basically once the repository came into existence, then this pattern of you load, you execute the command, and then you save became a pattern, which is why it's now a method that you then call from from wherever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I still don't love that. It's not as bad as when you didn't have the database in the picture, because then it was very much just a proxy, just calling through.
Right. And and of course, as the application gets more complex, I mean, I can switch to Ensembler to see a bit more complexity in the application layer. If there's decisions about who to notify or how to notify based on certain things happening, so like, you re-roll or you do something and there might be 3 possible different things depending on how what the new state of the object is. Then again, that coordination is in one place, because now it's involving these coordination of these external services.
Yeah. So, yeah, still, I don't love the game service. Now, the part of that is because I see people call things services and do terrible things.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I want to point out one thing, because for queries, right? So for current hand, can reroll, round completed, these are cases where the service is pointless. And so what I've interacted with some people on Twitter and so on, and really it's about the services are use cases, and use cases are all about doing stuff. And so the places where you just need information, right? It's only give me information. There is no point to having this code in the service. You may as well
it should just be returning. You should just ask
just call the repository. You just give me the game and ask it the question directly. Yeah. So but I agree. There's a lot of times when especially this copy and paste architecture of that I see all over the place in Spring and in other frameworks is. Let me create a service, and it's in the middle between the controller and the repository, and adds absolutely no behavior, does nothing but purely delegate. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're just copying a pattern. And yes, I rebel against that as well. And I go back and forth, and I think we've talked about this, like, should this even be called service? I think that it shouldn't, because it's not, because service has that bad flavor. And if you take out what are basically just queries that the service doesn't need to be involved at all, then you get rid of that stuff. And then what you're left with is things that actually do change the domain. And those are where you'll likely want some coordination.
So what I would suggest that we do, again, from the beginning, there's been nothing wrong with your code. So this is all just, exploring.
It's all about exploring and experimenting. Yeah.
So what I would suggest that we do is, what if we go into Yacht Controller, and like the meaty one, which I think is Yacht Controller, and what if we modify it to not interact with GameService, and we modify it to interact directly with, and we pretend it's the only thing there is.
Yeah.
And we modify it to interact with, so be that application UI root, interact with the infrastructure and the logic directly. See where that takes us.
Yeah.
And then from there, do the same thing with View Controller, and start identifying the duplication, and see if that takes us to the same place with GameService, or if we end up in a different place.
Yeah.
I think that could be interesting.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds great.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a good point for us to stop, because and then what I put up here at the top with regards to this event stuff, that was sort of my first pass at this. I think when we really start digging into it, we'll come up with something better.
Yeah.
Because I don't love the event-based approach. I mean, that was sort of my first way. Well, if you've got something that, if you wanted to have a centralized save, but you didn't want to have a delegate that just had to wrap every single thing, how could you do it?
Yeah.
This is one way to do it.
Yeah.
But there's probably a better way.
Yeah. And Kuros brings up a good point. If it's not just a basic query against some database that you're actually coordinating and combining, maybe you're even putting out a query and a fetcher because some is from the database and you have to enrich it with something from an external service, then I think that's where a service-like thing, some class carries its weight, because it's doing coordination and whatever else. That's not just it's not just a man in the middle that's doing nothing. Yeah.
Well, honestly, if all you had in here was roll dice, re-roll, assign roll 2, and give me the game, I don't think I would have triggered me the way it did in the beginning.
Right. Yeah.
Because then it'd be like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. But particularly, and we're not seeing it now, but when we first started doing this series way back when, it was so much just a copy of the game's methods.
Yes. And I will,
like, well,
I will grant you that,
right.
that was an artifact of putting the architecture before the horse, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is also really common. People.
Well, and I did it explicitly for, hey, let's do this in this way, because when we do get to persistence and fetchers and notifiers, it will matter.
Right. And also, I think for this particular project, you were just saying, well, let's pretend we have a database.
Exactly.
You don't want to have to actually deal with it.
Yeah.
Which is another example of how once you start doing things for real, the architectures always end up being a little different than you expected.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, we've got a plan for the future.
All right. So yeah. So next week, folks, we will be looking at A-frame architecture and seeing where that takes us.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. And we'll see you next time for that.